For decades, pop culture has taught us a singular golden rule for surviving the Cretaceous period. If you ever find yourself face to face with a Tyrannosaurus Rex, don't move. We were told its vision was based on movement, that if you stayed perfectly still, you would be invisible. It made for great cinema, but science paints a very different, far more terrifying picture. In reality, standing still wouldn't save you. It would simply make you an easier target. This is the true anatomy of the ultimate biological machine. Welcome to the vision of the Tyrant King. To understand how this apex predator saw the world, we have to look at its skull. And the first thing you notice is the sheer scale. The eye sockets of a fully grown T-Rex were absolutely massive, large enough to easily fit a grapefruit. In the world of optics, size matters. A larger eye means a larger pupil, allowing the retina to absorb massive amounts of light particles. But size wasn't its only advantage. Looking at the skull from above reveals a lethal evolutionary design. Notice the incredibly narrow snout and the wide, flared back of the skull. This specific shape forced the massive eyes to face completely forward. While herbivores like the Triceratops had eyes on the sides of their heads for a panoramic defensive view, the T-Rex traded peripheral defense for absolute binocular focus, the hallmark of an apex predator. Because both eyes faced forward, their visual fields overlapped by a staggering 55 degrees. This gave the T-Rex something a prey animal rarely has: perfect depth perception. It could calculate the exact distance to its target, down to the millimeter. Today, we consider the eagle to be the gold standard of visual acuity, but endocasts of the T-Rex brain reveal an immensely enlarged visual cortex. Scientists estimate that a T-Rex's vision was up to 13 times sharper than a human's, easily outperforming a modern eagle. And when the sun went down, the nightmare only worsened. Those massive grapefruit-sized eyes absorbed every trace of moonlight. Like modern crocodiles and cats, they possessed a tapetum lucidum, a reflective layer behind the retina that bounced light back through the eye. To a T-Rex, the pitch-black night was as clear as dusk. But its most alien weapon was invisible to the human eye. As a distant relative of modern birds, the T-Rex likely possessed tetrachromatic vision, 4 color receptors instead of our 3. This meant it could see into the ultraviolet spectrum. In this world, the biological trails left by prey, like urine and chemical markers, would glow like neon signs in the dark.
An armored herbivore might think it was perfectly camouflaged against the dark ferns, but under the lethal ultraviolet gaze of the Tyrant King, there was nowhere to hide. Once the target was locked, stealth was replaced by overwhelming kinetic energy. Despite 7 tons of muscle and bone violently shaking the earth, specialized neck muscles acted like a biological gimbal, keeping the massive head and the eyes perfectly stabilized on the prey. It wasn't just chasing, it was calculating, constantly processing distance, speed, and intercept vectors, until the distance reached 0. The execution was swift, and the forest returned to silence. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the Tyrant King was that it didn't always hunt alone. Fossil evidence suggests they may have lived in family units, Cretaceous wolves. In this pack, a roar isn't necessary, it's a liability. Order is maintained entirely through visual dominance. A single, unblinking stare from the alpha is enough to enforce the hierarchy. When hunting, their communication was completely silent. With visual acuity 13 times greater than our own, the alpha could lock eyes with its packmates through miles of dense forest. A subtle nod, a shift in the pupil. They combined their 55-degree binocular fields to create an inescapable, overlapping network of vision, a biological trap waiting to be sprung. Once the trap closed, the execution was flawless. The night belonged to them, and as the sun rose, it revealed the absolute rulers of this domain. For years, a controversial theory plagued the T-Rex, that it was too slow, too heavy to hunt, that it was nothing more than a giant scavenger feeding off the dead. But true scavengers, like vultures, rely on wide, panoramic vision to scan massive areas from above. The T-Rex's skull tells a completely different story. Evolution is incredibly efficient. It does not waste massive amounts of biological energy to build a highly complex, forward-facing 3D targeting system just to find something that isn't moving. The true scavengers of the Cretaceous were small, fast, and opportunistic. But when the king arrived, there was no fight. The T-Rex didn't need to waste energy roaring. It used its terrifying gaze as a psychological weapon, breaking the will of smaller predators before a single bite was taken. It had the eyes of a sniper, the nose of a bloodhound, and the power of a titan. It didn't just scavenge, it conquered. But hunting wasn't always a one-sided slaughter. When facing a fully grown Triceratops, a single mistake meant a slow, agonizing death. This wasn't a chase, it was a high-stakes game of chess. While the herbivore relied on its wide peripheral vision, it had a fatal flaw, a blind spot right in front of its nose. The T-Rex knew this, and it used its depth perception to measure the exact length of those lethal horns. Through blinding dust and chaos, those amber eyes never lost their lock. Every feint, every dodge was calculated down to the millimeter. Without binocular vision, calculating that exact distance would be impossible. The T-Rex would be impaled. It survived because it could see the weakness. It survived because it could calculate the risk. Yet this perfect visual machine wasn't designed solely for destruction. It was also designed for life. At the nest, those terrifying eyes softened, but they were always watching. Even while resting, a mother T-Rex could detect the microscopic movement of a fern leaf from miles away.
To a small, fast egg thief, natural camouflage was its greatest weapon. But against the ultraviolet vision of a T-Rex, physical camouflage was useless. The thief glowed like a beacon. When she struck, she didn't just use power. She used surgical precision, snapping her jaws mere millimeters from her fragile eggs. That same depth perception that allowed her to dodge a Triceratops horn allowed her to gently nudge a misplaced egg back to safety, ensuring that the legacy of the Tyrant King would live to see another day. The Cretaceous world was often forged in fire. When dry lightning struck, the dense forests were instantly transformed into a choking, blinding inferno. For most animals, the thick, toxic smoke meant pure panic and sensory loss. They ran completely blind into the abyss. But the T-Rex possessed an anatomical shield, a translucent third eyelid, the nictitating membrane, swept across the eye, acting as biological goggles against the falling ash. While the herbivores lost their minds in the gray haze, the predator's highly advanced contrast filtering vision pierced right through the smoke. It didn't need to chase blindly. It simply walked through the apocalypse, easily locating the injured and the trapped. In the heart of the inferno, the Tyrant King wasn't a victim, it was the ultimate opportunist. But there was one thing this perfect visual machine was never evolved to see. A new star in the night sky. A glowing anomaly reflecting perfectly in the amber eye of the king. For the first time in its existence, the apex predator looked up and didn't understand. 66 million years ago, a 6-mile-wide asteroid tore through the atmosphere. The flash was brighter than 1,000 suns. It instantly and violently overloaded the most advanced optical system on the planet. Then came the shock wave. In a single geological heartbeat, the reign of the Tyrannosaurus Rex was extinguished, buried beneath a blanket of toxic ash, waiting in the dark for millions of years. When we finally unearthed its skull from the dust of deep time, we fundamentally misunderstood it. Pop culture painted it as a blurry-eyed movie monster, easily fooled by a flare or a standstill. But science has shattered that illusion. It was a masterpiece of biological engineering, a highly intelligent, calculating hunter. And its visual legacy did not die in the ash. It lives on today, in the sharp, perfectly focused, forward-facing gaze of modern birds of prey. The Tyrannosaurus Rex saw the world with terrifying, undeniable clarity. So if you ever find yourself facing one in a movie, whatever you do, don't just stand there. But the T-Rex was not the only giant to walk the ancient Earth. In the murky, choked river systems of ancient North Africa, a different kind of monster was evolving. One that traded bone-crushing jaws for lethal, scythe-like claws. A leviathan that ruled the water. Next time, we dive into the domain of the River King, the Spinosaurus.